Hello and welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. Tensions around Iran are again rising amidst speculation about possible U.S. military action and deepening ties between Tehran and Moscow. As the war in Ukraine enters another year, questions resurface about Iranian drone supply to Russia, regional security, and how the wider world is reading these signals. Joining us today on TVP World to break it all down is Łukasz Fyderek, head of the Institute of the Middle East and Far East at Jagiellonian University, a scholar of Middle Eastern politics as well as regional power dynamics. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Hello, and thank you for having me.
So I would like to kick things off with the most recent announcement, as we have heard from senior U.S. officials saying that Witkoff and Kushner is going to be meeting Iranian officials in Geneva on Thursday. What's the speculation here, and what do you think the conversation is likely going to be about?
Well, up until the recent interview with Witkoff, most of analysts were quite single-minded that there are three major topics on the table, three main topics which are of interest for the USA. First is obviously the nuclear issue and the tendency or the willingness of American administration to denuclearize Iran or to cut short its nuclear enrichment program. Then the ballistic missile file, where the U.S. is willing to limit severely the stockpiles of Iranian ballistic missiles, which may threaten Israel and other American allies in the Middle East and maybe even beyond. And then the third file, which is about the support of proxies, or so-called the axis of resistance. So that was the consensus, but the recent interview which Witkoff gave yesterday, if I'm not too much mistaken, he was basically talking only about the nuclear file. So there is, I would say, a sort of lack of clarity if it's the official U.S. position that the other two important regional topics, namely the axis of resistance, the proxies, the Iranian proxies, and the ballistic missiles are no longer on the table. That would be preferable solution for Iran. Iranians for long they have advocated for not touching upon those issues which they perceive as very vital for their national security, and that would make those conversations, those negotiations easier somehow. But well, honestly, we don't know if those two other large topics were somehow put aside, or are they still a part of the conversation with Iran.
Right, so do you think this is one of those conversations that is trying to simmer things down, or are we looking at a potential about the potential strike on Iran? How realistic is the scenario that Washington would actually take kinetic action?
Well, we have here a very different, I would say, time perspectives, because when you amass forces like the U.S. did in a region, you operate in a rather short period of time. U.S. is able to pressure Iran with such a massive armada, but it won't be positioned in the Middle East. I mean by that the substantial naval groups and large Air Force component. They won't be positioned in the Middle East for indefinite period. So there is a certain time bounded, let's say, perspective on that military pressure. On the other hand, negotiations tend to be prolonged. Just to remind the recent JCPOA, which was negotiated under Obama administration, finally, before it was signed in 2015, it took almost 2 years, 1.5 years of negotiating very, we would say, technical issues related to limiting Iranian nuclear program at that point. And now, obviously, Donald Trump Trump is willing to get a better deal. That's what he mentioned many times. So it is difficult to square those two time perspectives to somehow bridge them. Large military pressure with which may take days, weeks, or months, and negotiating process which tends to be very, very prolonged. So probably on Thursday, Donald Trump and his administration will await Iranians to bring some substantial declarations about limiting their nuclear program, and probably those other topics, particularly the ballistic missiles. But it is to be seen.
All right, like I mentioned, these are two different timelines where negotiation usually take a longer time than these large military buildup that can't really be sustained there forever. Do you think that this is also another type of pressure tactic showcasing that the Americans are locked and loaded and willing to go in a very short time frame in order to pressure Iran into stepping up and taking that deal, putting the time pressure and putting the clock on the Iranian regime?
Absolutely. The military buildup or military demonstration is a part of negotiating tactics or a process, right? It's also, when we talk about international politics, you may communicate with words via diplomatic meetings. Or you may communicate with a demonstration of force, and this is clearly what's happening right now in the Middle East. To put that military buildup in perspective, it is a substantial one, yet not that large as we saw in previous conflicts in the Gulf. So for instance, most analysts will say that our U.S. Air Force and Navy combined, they do have right now in the theater around between 200 to 250 combat airplanes. Before fall of Saddam Hussein, before in the springtime in 2003, it was more than 800 military combat airplanes deployed by the U.S. Air Force and U.S. Navy. So it's not as big armada as it was more than 20 years ago, but still a substantial part of the U.S. Power projection, global power projection, is right now focused or deployed in the Middle East. And it, as we said, you won't be able to sustain that for indefinite period. Taking into account the other obligations and the other security challenges for the U.S. global presence.
All right, and like I mentioned, we'll have to see how that negotiation goes. But in the meantime, I also want to explore another topic, and that is Iran's increased cooperation with Russia. Now, they have been supplying drones to Russia during the war in Ukraine, which is quite substantial. And now there's also talks about potentially working on ballistic missiles and such. But how significant has this cooperation been military and politically?
Well, this is a cooperation between two authoritarian regimes. So this cooperation is happening in the context of, let's say, low trust context or low trust relations. Those two regimes, they have this so-called, you may call it a marriage of convenience, but it's a low trust relationship. So it's a very transactional. Obviously, we know that there is substantial supplies of Iranian drone technologies, probably some other technologies as well to Russia. And in the other way, well, there is not that much happening, definitely not as much as Iranian would like to see. But still, there are at least two important transactions which recently were somehow presented in the media, or at least were leaked to the media. One of those transactions relates to the combat helicopters or gunships. There are some rumors that Russia supplied military gunship helicopters, maybe 6 of them, maybe 10 of them, Mi-28, quite modern gunships. And the other transaction, the second one, which is recently being discussed, is the transaction on manpads, namely the short-range anti-aircraft missiles, which Russia made a deal to provide to Iran. Those two types of military hardware. Well, first of all, gunships are not the thing which is of primary importance for Iran right now. Iran is looking for anti-aircraft, anti-missile defense. That's something which they are really willing to strengthen after the disastrous war, so-called 12 days war in June 2025. The second deal in which Russia decided or promised to deliver those short-range Manpads missiles may be stronger, maybe of some importance for the, let's say, larger picture, a military picture of Iranian air defense. Having said that, we need to keep in mind that when we look at this relationship, Russia-Iran relationship from purely military perspective, we need to underline that the previous deliveries, the Russian delivered systems for air defense, has been obliterated by the Israeli strikes half a year or more than half a year ago, and that is a testament to inferiority of Russian rocket technology, radar technology compared to Israeli or, in broader sense, Western technology, and that's where Iran is right now.
All right, last but not least, we have a minute, so real quick, how do you think Europe is looking at this conflict? Is it through the lens of Ukraine, nuclear negotiations, or more focusing on the Middle East stability?
Well, there is a lot of that. That's a large topic. First of all, well, there are different views in Europe, but briefly, from European perspective, the scale of that conflict, the scale of potential spillover from this war is something which European governments may be very much worried about. Because if this conflict will be kept limited to some airstrikes and some token or symbolic rocket barrage from Iran, if it will be contained, that's a regional issue, Middle Eastern issue, which doesn't affect a larger dynamic. But if that conflict could spill over to regional conflagration, if Iran will decide to attack targets in the Hormuz Strait, on the territory of Arab oil-producing states in the Gulf, which is certainly one of the escalation. One of the scenarios of escalation which Iranians do contemplate, that is a big issue because that would drive oil prices up. And that would make Russian economy much more, or made Russia as an energy supplier much more sought after in the global markets.
Right. So we're going to see this whole ripple effect that is going to have a lot of impact within the European Union as well. Thank you so much for your input and insight. I really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.